Welcome to Integro Talks, a podcast series brought to you by Integro Advisors, where we dive into the world of compliance, risk management, and due diligence, and provide you with expert insight and analysis to help you make more informed business decisions. Hello, and welcome to Integro Talks, a podcast by Integro Advisors that delivers fresh, smart, and engaging conversations with leaders and stakeholders in and around the world of risk management and compliance. My name is Alberto de la Portilla. I'm the CEO and founder of Integro Advisors. A hot topic in the business world today, actually for years now, has been innovation and emerging technologies, and specifically financial innovation. Today, we have invited someone who has been engaged in financial innovation as a facilitator in the world of payments for several years. John Rodriguez is head of business development for Visa Direct Latin America and the Caribbean, which is helping individuals and businesses send and receive money efficiently around the world, including remittances. He has a history of success driving sales and business development initiatives with top-tier global banks and FinTechs within the Americas. John has served in various senior corporate banking roles previously with Barclays Bank, HSBC, and Wells Fargo. He's also a past president of the Financial and International Business Association, FIBA, where we both have served as board members in the past. His role as a thought leader in financial innovation is why we have invited him here today. Hello, John. How are you today?
Good morning, Alberto. So happy to be with you today, and I really appreciate the invitation.
So thank you. So let's talk financial innovation. So we know financial innovation refers to the process of creating new financial and investment products, services and processes through updated technologies. Tell me about how your role in this space today. When did you first begin to take an interest in financial innovation, and how did you get here?
Well, I back in 2017, I had been at some conferences, and I was noticing the presence of FinTechs that are providing digital platforms. And one of the things that intrigued me was how banks were really looking at the space really more with the interest of, wow, what a potential business this can be.
Right.
And as you know, I've been a career banker, transaction banker at that. And one of the things that I found really quite interesting is that through FIBA, and in fact, today I'll speak in my role as a FIBA past chair, which I also want to thank you for being a member of FIBA and very strong in the advocacy, especially in the AML space, right? And this allows me to speak a little bit about the industry and the challenges. So one of the things that I found quite interesting is the expansion and the way the business is migrating. We see a very strong generational change. We see the younger generations in particular embracing technology in a way where we have done some surveys, for example, and I can reference the head of Visa Direct here at Visa. His name is Ruben Salazar Genovez. He heads our Visa Direct globally. And we do surveys, and one of the things that I want to reference from this, and I can share some of the money movement research articles with you, is that if you look at the space, right, we find that in the survey that we've done with users, right, of digital payments, and particularly remittances, we find that approximately 60 to 70% only use digital platforms. But the real point here to make is that in the future, they only expect and will use digital platforms.
Right.
So that's the challenge banks have, right? How can they get into the space and enjoy the growth and the exponential growth, especially from marketplaces, the gig economy? We see today, for example, and again, just to mention examples that we see out there, digital platforms today are driving innovation. We know that from example, from public information entities like Venmo, Zelle. These are more domestic type programs, but the space is now moving more in the international space.
And let's talk about that a little bit more on the international side, because obviously we're both in Miami. Remittances is such a big part of the economy, of the trans-American economy between South Florida and Latin America. So I know the 60% of remittance users have or plan to use digital platforms. Tell me about how financial innovation is, and if you can get into some detail, how that is facilitating the remittance space, and
Exactly.
where do you see the growth?
So today you see that many banks have platforms such as home banking. They might even have retail platforms that are digital. And what we're really doing here is connecting into the rail that allows you through an API to connect into real time or near real time payments. And that's a real benefit. The user experience here, if you look at traditional rails, the end-to-end requirements are such that there's some connectivity that's being lost in the traditional rails. So how do you get access to ensure that you can make payments to credentials that are related to accounts? And the point here to make is that banks know their customer, they have their regulatory responsibilities. Accessing this rail doesn't change that framework. What it does is allows them to use new, more innovative settlement processes to effect payments in a lower cost, more efficiently. Also, the time frame certainly is expedited. The FX in many of these transactions, especially in the cross-border space, when we deal with cross-border money movement, is undefined. So imagine having a user experience where you know exactly the amount you're going to receive. Mm-hmm. The FX is going to be charged, right? There's not going to be any surprises along the way just because end-to-end is not there, where you might have to, as they use the word in Spanish, triangular, and triangulate. Right. And that means that you have to go through correspondence to reach the final beneficiary's account. And that could be, 2-3 correspondents in some cases in certain markets. I'm not saying that that's the case all the time. But the fact is that if you can get access to making payments through rails that are efficient, Visa Direct is a good example. You do have access to provide financial inclusion, which is something that's really right now huge in this space. The small and medium-sized companies have some of the largest segments and biggest growth, especially in employment. And so the gig economy and a lot of these marketplaces are showing interest where not only are we seeing payments cross-border, from let's say global standpoint, for example, small imports, services, but also intra-regionally, because we find in case of some of these countries and some of the free trade agreements that we see, that you almost have workers that sort of cross the borders, if you will, and they want to make payments to their account. And so there is this P2P, which is person-to-person type facilitation. Mm-hmm. Usually in this type of space, they require immediate settlement because right. It's usually a remittance. Right. But you find also that in the B business to business, small business space, B to small business or B to business to customer disbursements, for example, these tend to be low value. But the interesting thing is, Alberto, that these generally don't flow through traditional channels. Right. These are right now in the digital platforms offered by many FinTechs, in fact. And what you're finding is many banks are connecting and creating their own digital bank or their neobank or process, or even directly where they can connect to an API to reach these rails. And so examples, Visa Direct among some other providers, they have the ability to settle through credentials in a very fast and efficient way for remittances. And again, on the B2C, as we call business to customer disbursements and business to small business space, which again are low value payments, you want to have the ability to have a definitive, let's say, experience on the user to make sure that payment gets there efficiently. And usually it could be T+1 or a little bit more, depending on the global reach for time zone reasons. But it's become a big movement in this space. Now, as you know, we're leading into the CLAB conference at FIBA, and mm-hmm. again, we appreciate always your support at FIBA. Right. One of the big initiatives is going to be how do banks, get in the space, either directly by providing their own technology access through the APIs, or if not, partnering with FinTechs. And for example, we have Yellow Pepper in the case of Visa, which is a facilitator. They actually provide access to these APIs in a more efficient way, so they can work with banks. There's a recent Finastra announcement that's made public where enablement is also a solution that banks can go to, among others. Right? There's been a lot of work in this space. The key for entities like Visa is how do you connect the digital space, but remember, the rails can be through very efficient channels that are associated with accounts, usually through debit cards. There's also channels such as accounts, which reach the ACH network by way of being able to send a cross-border payment and settle through the local ACH. And you also have wallets, which is a huge, huge development. And again, it's the future.
And you touched on something earlier about you touched on the term financial inclusion, and obviously this seems to be at the heart of the philosophy behind some of these emerging technologies, and that is to include those that have been previously or have never had access to traditional banking services. Maybe they live in remote areas in certain parts of the developing regions of Latin America. Is that sort of, do you agree with this being kind of one of the end goals? Obviously, I would imagine also just kind of general economic development across the region, but just tell me about what you think of the financial inclusion as it pertains to emerging technologies.
Definitely, it's an economic reactivator in the sense that you do have access to the unbanked, and this is actually a segment where we find a lot of banks in Latin America that are focusing in this area.
Right.
But you find also the small and medium-sized companies, the pymes as we call them. They need access to more efficient purchase channels, payment channels, worker payment channels. The gig economy is a good example, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so to your question, yeah, this provides more inclusiveness not only in the individual financial inclusion space for remitters to attract inbound flows to the countries for remittance purposes, to allow more what we call hard currency. Let's say increase, if you will, through these channels that provide this increase, but also you're talking about the intra-regional and the global space, right? If you're going to make a small import from Europe, or if you're going to make a small service payment, let's say for a provider abroad, this is a perfect channel to do so. And we're not talking about very large amounts, right?
Right.
Remittances, we know, are generally, sort of in lower space. Not quite sure of the average, but let's just say, for example purposes, $600. That is we call it pagos masivos. That's where you're finding a huge trend. But to your question, you find that FinTechs have been very active in this space, and banks, not that they've been passive, they see the value today, and they will now want to say, you know what? We can compete, we can affect access and grow this segment, grow this business. It's quite lucrative in the sense that, yeah, even though it's a lower cost and so on, but when you look at the amount of flows, globally, it's quite large.
Yeah, and I agree, and it's interesting that you referenced the collab, because I know that the theme this year is innovate or die. For collab, that's kind of the message they're putting out there, which is essentially directly to the traditional banking institution, right? I would imagine that you need to get on board or not, and then just be left at the station, right? Because we're moving in a new direction.
Thank you, Alberto. I think that from FIBA, the standpoint, when we spoke with David Schwartz on the actual topic, it's banks are eager to understand the technology. This year, we will have, for example, highlighting Visa Direct and the rails for real-time payments, near real-time. And we will also highlight, we have the CEO from Yellow Pepper attending, which is a fintech, again, that provides the API access for banks. And I would say that it's a pretty harsh title. But what I find is banks, by and large, do still control a dominant percentage of payments, especially in the cross-border space.
Right.
The key here is, how do you expand it, and how do you do so in a way that's efficient and be able to compete and grow in this space? I say that banks, and as I mentioned earlier when we opened our discussion, looking at fintechs not at times not necessarily as a competitor, but also as a facilitator or as a enabler. And so the conference, as you know, is going to have all in one place most of the banks that attend from Latin America, and also fintechs, a lot from the US and globally. So in one space, you get a chance to have these discussions and see what's the best fit,
right,
for you to provide access to this business.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about the positives and the realities where the world of banking and payments is heading today. But let's talk a little bit about the challenges. What challenges do you see today and tomorrow with respect to the ability for financial innovation and emerging technologies to continue along this kind of very rapid path that it's on?
Well, you're seeing a move, especially, and again, from an industry perspective, the central bank digital currencies, that's a movement. We've seen the PIX in Brazil, for example, enter into the space. And what you're finding is that banks can still play a significant role by accessing rails. The key here is, can you access sufficient enough endpoints to make this process efficiently? And so the huge opportunity and the challenge is in the cross-border space. Mm-hmm. Because there is where you find, again, in this more of a global economy situation, where you're finding sourcing of small import services. We all know, for example, and again, just from public information that we see, you're going to make payments on Airbnb, you're going to make payments on Uber. A lot of these things, are done digitally. Right. And so in these marketplaces locally, banks are now looking to enter into the space. And again, based on public information, there was a launch recently done by Match, a bank in Chile with BCI, that now basically accesses their access from their local digital platform for person-to-person payments to cross-border. And so in this particular case, you're seeing banks being very effective in entering the space, because the challenge again is if we do a survey and the result is that 70% of digital platform users will only use digital platforms, we got to get into that space. And so Collab this year, I think, is going to be a good venue for us to have these discussions.
Let's talk about regulation. Obviously, the banking industry is a heavily regulated industry globally. There was an article that I read recently in the American Banker, I think last month, where it said that the U.S.'s financial regulatory framework, the sort of patchwork of state and federal, is preventing a comprehensive and coordinated response to emerging technologies. Right. So, and the ability for financial innovation to continue to thrive. So, what's your opinion about how regulators can promote, on the one hand, financial innovation, but also continue to protect consumers?
Thank you. I think at the end of the day, and again, I can't speak on behalf of the regulation or the regulators, if you will, but
right.
Through FIBA,
right.
we make a big emphasis of ensuring that banks have the safety and soundness, and certainly the infrastructure for the AML policies to be in place based on regulatory requirements. And so I think we need to understand that, we're not changing that. We are looking at the ability to incorporate that. In fact, some of the APIs will actually have the monitoring, will have the lists, the required sanctions listings and things incorporated to prevent these type of payments from reaching the bad guys, if you will. So I think when you look at these flows, for example, a lot of the business that we actually transact cross-border in the digital bank space, it's actually the majority is banks. And so we know banks have the local regulation. We know that banks also abide by the multi-country regulations where it's required, certainly in the U.S. Financial system, which is a prerequisite. So licensing, the enhanced due diligence, all these things are still done, I believe, effectively by the banks, or at least that's the attempt, right, to ensure that as they look at these new rails, that they still incorporate sound AML practices.
So what else about financial? I mean, you're a career banker. I remember meeting you eons ago when you were in a different capacity, but always in the corporate banking world in the Americas. You're a career banker, and you've seen it from the front lines how the world has changed. And you're not one of the young pups out there that are involved in startups. You're I don't want to. So that's what else excites you about this?
It's a great point. Well, yeah, as I said, the transaction banking business has evolved, right? And as I said earlier, we started seeing the train coming a while ago, right? I'm happy to say that I'm still in this space. The fact that I was a career transaction banker or banker, if you will, it tells you something about the role. Because today, for example, Visa, as an example, they have relationships with banks, and so for me, it was a nice way to come in from the space that banks are trying to reach to provide these solutions. So my role really at FIBA, and also, as I said, through CLAB and also working with entities like Integro, is how do we send out the message that this is a very viable business, that yes, it can be grown and it can be lucrative from monetization standpoint, but banks don't necessarily have to be afraid to go into it. And it's not like we're taking business away from traditional rails. We're just using new rails, more innovative rails, to affect payments based on what the user today requires. And that user experience, again, because I mentioned the generational shift that you've seen, the embracing of technology.
This one last question, which I find very interesting. I both you and I have been around, banking in and around banking for many, many years. And banking has always been about relationships and face-to-face relationships, particularly when it comes to Latin America, that culture, that custom remains very strong. Also in South Florida, how do you see these sort of fintech products and services and financial innovation, continuing to honor and respect that culture, even though a lot of this is just digital and there's no face-to-face contact with customers, even new customers? I understand banks in Guatemala that are onboarding new customers to their digital wallets are not even meeting customers anymore. It's just everything's done electronically. How can you balance that culture and that custom of traditional banking and relationship building with financial innovation today?
Thank you. I believe that's a great question, Alberto. Speaking again on behalf of FIBA and the trend that we see in banks, banks are definitely relationship focused, and I don't see necessarily that trend necessarily changing. I think the misconception is that the fintech side of the solution takes away from having that personal access and contact, because I believe banks have the biggest benefit in the sense that they already have a client in place and they're offering a new solution through new digital and innovation channels.
Right.
So imagine retaining that client versus losing that client potentially to a competitor, or even not only a bank that offers the solution, but a digital platform solution, but also a fintech. And so the idea here is that in order to retain and grow the business and give new access points, especially for new business opportunities, that can be done through the relationship channel. And that's something that banks really do well. At the end of the day, though, when we talk about financial inclusion, you're accessing new clients.
Right.
So it's also small business solutions. You're accessing new PMS, new clients to expand one of the biggest growing sectors in the economies.
Yeah, and I also think, if you have that client and that's been your client for decades, the next generation of those families that live and operate in Latin America are certainly much more adept at technology and much more open to this type of banking and financial transacting. Yeah.
Absolutely. Think about the flip side of that. If you have a user of a cross-border payment and you're using a traditional rail, and that payment might have some deductions, or that payment might have, let's say, a certain time frame that's not defined, or an FX type situation that's not defined, the user is really looking for a solution to that, right? And so these new digital rails provide that efficiency, that transparency. More importantly, the user experience is enhanced, and chances are that client will stay with you, and bank with you using this new offering. And banks are looking at these home banking platforms where they're simply adding a new feature to make a payment, and that payment is done through a digital platform solution.
Well, thank you. I want to just end on a light note, and just ask you a completely off the wall question, which is, I always like to do this. I'm an avid fan of music, and so I listen to a lot of music.
Fantastic.
I have a collection of music at home. I've taught my children well, as Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young have said. And so when I think of innovation, I think of pioneers. And so I wanted to ask you, in your mind, who are some of the great music pioneers of the past 50 years?
Well, I'd say that, for my generation, let's just kind of speak a little bit about the fact that I grew up in New Jersey. I went to Rutgers. I had the whole entire growing up experience, if you will. And it's a song that I reflect with Bruce Springsteen growing up. And so, I'm a big fan. He's transcended the times with wonderful music. He has been a tremendous influence to me. Certainly, after the 9/11, he dedicated an entire album to that situation, and now today he's still going strong and producing some really great music.
Yeah.
So I'm a little bit biased to New Jersey type artists, John Bon Jovi, for example.
Sure.
Who lived two towns away from me.
Yeah. Oh, really? Is that right? Yeah. Listen, The Boss is a great example. Bruce Springsteen is an icon. I love the fact that he is continuing to make incredible music today at this stage in his life. He is a workhorse. He is so disciplined. I've seen documentaries about him. I saw him live in concert many years ago. I'm a big fan of Bruce Springsteen, so that's a fantastic example to a great response. Anyway, John, I
think his legacy. I'll just mention it. Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go on.
No, I was just saying. I think his legacy when he had his Springsteen on Broadway was a great example of really realizing that great achievement throughout his career as an amazing artist. But he's still going strong, and he's not, he's still moving forward, and he's at late stage of his life, if you will. But he's still moving into very new, uncharted music.
Well, we should all follow his path, right? So you certainly are driven by that. So you continue to seek new paths through financial innovation. So, John, thank you again for your time today and your availability. Look forward to seeing you soon in and around South Florida. And thank you to everyone for watching and listening this episode of Integro Talks. And stay tuned for the next one.